Hello everyone. It's been a while that I wanted to make this introduction to Krita mini course. I've been wanting to expand the scope of the channel into more traditional illustration tutorials, and I've been using and loving Krita for a few years now. In case you don't know, Krita is an open source digital painting software. It was created as a free alternative to the paid industry standard Photoshop, and in my opinion, it is as powerful as Photoshop for digital painting. This video will not go in-depth into the program. It is meant to be a quick introduction and overview to get you up and running with it, so you can get painting and working in Krita as fast as possible. So if you want to learn Krita and the basics of digital painting, I suggest you to go to krita.org and download the latest version and start following the video. One last thing before moving on, if you want to support the channel, give this video a like and subscribe for more beginner tutorials on Krita and illustration in general. If you want to support the channel and learn something fun, make sure to check out the description for my old courses, which are all aimed at beginners and deal with subjects like character design, background design, game art, Inkscape, and more. Let's start with the creation of new documents, the basics of the user interface and how to handle yourself in the program. Once you open Krita for the first time, you should see this kind of splash window. This appears every time you open the program. Here you have a few options and links to some basic information. Let's begin by creating a new document. Of course, you can click here in the New File button, but if you want, you can also go the traditional way by going to File, New. In this dialog, you have a few options for the creation of new documents. Most of what's here are options that are not important to us right now, so make sure the very first tab that says Custom Document is selected, and then pay attention to these two input boxes. The one that says width, and the other one that says height. You can safely ignore everything else for now. Obviously, these buttons set the actual resolution or size of the document in pixels. Just make sure the drop-down right next to them says pixels, like it does here. If you're new to digital painting, you need to be careful with the resolution you put here. As a rule of thumb, you want to work in the biggest size document your PC can handle. If the illustration is made really big, with a huge pixel resolution, you can always downscale your illustration later on and you won't be losing any detail. However, this does not work the other way around. Upscaling will always result in some loss of information. Now, the modern day standard for any type of graphic or video is 4K. You'll rarely need something bigger than that, and what's better, even the more modest modern day PC should be able to handle that resolution and bigger without too much slowdown. So a document with a size of 4000 by 4000 should work just fine, and will give you a bit of extra room as well. And here is Krita running. Let me give you a super quick rundown of how to handle yourself in the program. This whole area at the center is the document area. The white rectangle is the canvas you just created. You can only paint inside of it. Hold the space and click to pan around the document. Hold Ctrl and space together, and then click to zoom. If you move up, you zoom in, and if you move down, you zoom out. As you zoom in and out, you see this label at the top left that indicates the zoom percentage. This is super useful to know, so keep an eye there. Finally, you can rotate the canvas. This is especially useful if you want to work with a traditional tablet. Hold Shift and drag. Depending on where you click, it will rotate clockwise or counterclockwise when you move the mouse. It's also useful to keep in mind a couple of shortcuts related to the canvas. The keys 1 to 6 have some useful functionality. With the 1 key, you can zoom to 100%. With the 2 key, you can zoom to fit to the size of the windows. The 4 and 6 key will let you rotate the canvas in increments. But more importantly, you can use the 5 key to set the canvas to the original orientation. Really important when you're using the rotate functionality. Now let's talk quickly about the user interface. Krita has an incredibly flexible UI made of docking windows. If you're familiar with Photoshop, this is basically identical. If you go to the top menu and go to Settings, Dockers, you see a list of all dockable windows you can open. Each one of these contains a set of options and tools that you will use in different occasions. You can see which ones are showing by looking at the checkmark at the side. As you can see, there are a ton of them. Luckily, you only need to learn to use a few of them for an average illustration, and the rest are more situational. Krita allows you to customize the user interface very easily in a matter of seconds. First of all of these windows can be resized and move around. You'll find that all windows have a menu on top, and you can click on the X button to close them. The button right next to the X will undock it. Now you can resize it and move it all around and place it where you want. You'll see that the windows can be docked pretty much everywhere you want. Just pay attention to the blue guide that tells you where it's gonna be docked. You can even place it directly on top of another one, and it will be placed as a tab. Great to save some space. I just made a mess here showing you how to handle the UI. Luckily, like all good programs with UI customization, Krita comes with a lot of presets. Go to Windows, Workspace, and here you have a ton of pre-made UI configurations to pick. The one that comes by default is this one that says Default. So click on it to go back to normal. There's more to the UI customization in Krita, but I think we don't need to go deeper for now. Krita can handle multiple documents at the same time like tabs in a browser. Right here at the top you'll see this big bar with the name of the document. If you create or open new documents, a new tab will be created. You can switch between tabs and work independently in each one. You can also close a tab with the X button. What I recommend you to do is to play a bit with the program, just to get comfortable with it. Remember that you cannot break anything, you can always go back and set the default workspace and everything gets fixed. Let's talk about the brush engine. The brush engine is the inner way the program handles the different brushes, the tools you use to draw and paint. Krita has one of the best and most flexible brush engines in any digital illustration software. It's extremely powerful, giving you hundreds of options and tons of presets. All of these tools over here make use of the brush engine, but the most important one, the one you'll be using 99% of the time when you're drawing or painting, is this one, called appropriately the brush tool. So select it and you should be able to test the brush engine. Here you can try your tablet and make sure the pressure and everything else is working fine. Now pay attention to this icon over here. If you click here, you'll see a list of all the brushes that you have installed. Each of these brushes have a completely different behavior, emulating the different ways real-life drawing and painting medium works. Some of these are quite basic, they copy the way some pencils and pens work, but others are really cool. Just pay attention to the icon. It will show you how the stroke will look. As you can see, you have a million different types of brushes, pretty much everything you'll ever need to illustrate anything you may want. Here I recommend you to just pick the ones that look fun and try them out and just get a feeling of how they work. By the way, in the default user interface, at the right side, you have the same windows with the preset docked, so you don't even need to click on that button to open it. Also docked on the right side is one of the most important windows, the color selection window, which lets you change the currently selected color. Just click on the triangle. You can also use the outer circle to change the colors displayed on the triangle. But of course, you also need to be able to erase. Now, Krita does not have a proper eraser tool like Photoshop. Instead, it shares the eraser with the selected brush. To enable it, just click on this button here at the top with the icon of the eraser. Or better yet, hit the shortcut key E. It's a toggle button, so you'll need to disable it to go back to painting. Very important is to be able to change the size of the brush. This is super easy to do. Right here at the top you have this slider that controls how big is the brush. However, I strongly recommend you to get used to using the keyboard shortcuts. It's a pain having to go up here every 5 seconds to change the size of the brush. The default shortcuts are the straight bracket keys. Right next to the size slider there is a slider that says opacity, and I want to talk about what this means. Basically, digital painting involves making a lot of use of this feature. Opacity, in general, refers to the transparency of a stroke. You probably noticed that most of the brushes you picked have this nice feature where the more you press on the tablet, the darker the stroke gets. As if it were real life medium where the harder you push a pencil or pen or brush on the paper, the more pigment gets in and the more opaque it looks. Well, in Krita and in all digital painting software, this look is achieved by varying the opacity of the stroke depending on how hard you press on the tablet. At maximum pressure, you'll get 100% full opacity, that is, no transparency. Most of the time, this is exactly what you want to get a brush that simulates how real-life medium works, but sometimes you want something more subtle. You want less potency, less opacity. This is where this slider comes in, to lower the range of opacity you get out of the brush. Let me warn you, I like to mess the least possible with this slider. I always leave it to 100% and I only touch it when it's absolutely necessary. I prefer to rely on the pressure sensitivity of my tablet for low opacity strokes, and I recommend you to do the same. I thought to mention opacity because later on it's gonna be more important when we talk about layers and other features. One last thing regarding brushes and the brush engine. I'm not gonna go into it, but as you may know, it is possible to create your own brushes, save them and share them with other people. In fact, chances are that you're aware you can download brush packs with tons of really useful brushes. Now, like I said, I'm not gonna go into creating our own brushes here because it's complicated and it takes time, but I want you to know that editing your brushes is actually super easy and fast. Right next to the button we use to access the brushes, there is this button that will open the brush editor. Here you can see all the brushes that you have installed and see and modify all the options that makes the brush how it is. Here you can also mess around with the options and create your own brushes. For now, I recommend you to not mess with any of these options. I just thought to mention it because these options may come up at some time. Besides, oddly enough, there are a couple of important options that are hidden in this dialog. This checkbox over here lets you separate the size of the eraser mode and the brush mode, which in my opinion it should be the behavior by default. So I like to come here and tick this box on. Now let's talk about layers. Layers are one of the most revolutionary concepts introduced by digital software. Chances are that even if you never worked with a painting software before, some other piece of software has introduced you to the concept of layers. Layers works exactly the same than in any other digital program, including Photoshop, Paint Studio, CorelDRAW. So if you know how layers work in those programs, you understand how they work here. With the default user interface, you should see the layers window right here. As you can see by default when you create a document, Krita will create for you two layers, one that says background and another one that says paint layer 1. The background is a normal layer that has a few options enabled. We'll go over that later. There is a lot of things you can do with layers. In fact, it will take an entire course to deal with everything you can do with them, but here I just thought to show you the most basic stuff to get you up and running. So let's take a quick look at that. First of all, you draw in the layer that's currently selected. You see when a layer is selected when it's blue like this. So far everything we've drawn with the brush tool has been in paint layer 1, but now let's create a new layer. Just hit the plus icon at the bottom of the windows. You should see that a new layer was created called paint layer 2, and it was automatically selected. Now everything you draw is gonna be on this layer. We can still see what's on layer paint 1, because layers are just like that transparent paper, they show through everything where it's not drawn. So I'm gonna grab a brush and change the colors so we can differentiate what's on each layer, and I'm gonna sketch something. Right now it works identically as if we were working on a single layer. However, here's the really awesome part. I'm gonna switch to the eraser and notice how I can delete what's on this layer, paint layer 2, without affecting what's on the layer below, paint layer 1. I'm sure you can imagine how useful is this to paint non-destructively. What's more, I can switch back to paint layer 1 by selecting it in the layers menu and start drawing without affecting the content of paint layer 2. You can create as many layers as you want. In fact, most paintings will have anywhere from 10 to 100 or more layers. So you can see how integral layers are to the process of digital painting. Let's take a look at some more tools and features associated with layers. First of all, you already know how to create a new layer. Just use the plus button over here. Right next to the button there are other options, and this goes into the more advanced features of the program. We won't be covering that now. Every time you create a new layer, the layer will be given a default name. But you can change that by double clicking on the layer name. You can also change the order at any time you want. Just use these two arrows to move them up or down. Of course, this is going to change the display order, since you're changing which layer is on top. And of course, you can also delete a layer using the trash can icon. Very important, when you delete a layer, you also delete its content for good. Sometimes it's very useful to be able to temporarily turn off a few layers so we can see what's on a layer below. And you can do that with this little icon of an eye that appears by the left of the layer name. By the way, you'll notice that right next to the eye, there is this little square. If you pay attention, you'll notice that it shows a preview of what's on each layer. It's really small and kinda difficult to see, and it's also difficult to interpret because it only displays where there is pixel information, but it can help you to guess the content of each layer if you didn't properly name them. This next option can be important for some specific situations. Right next to the menu, you'll see this slider that says opacity. If you remember from a while back, opacity basically means transparency. But here, instead of being applied on the go as you draw the stroke, this slider will make all pixel information on the layer more transparent depending on the percentage set here. This is also really useful for when you want to trace over a sketch or when you want to dial back the strength of something you painted. This next option is not that important, but I want to talk about it to clarify a bit the interface. By clicking on this little lock, you can lock the layer, which means that you cannot draw on it even if you select it. The program won't let you. This is basically used to remind yourself that you should not touch a layer accidentally. In real life, I don't see too much use for it, but sometimes it happens that you work on the wrong layer accidentally, so I guess some people will find it useful. I wanted to show you how it works because when you create a new document, you see these two layers. One at the bottom called background and another on top called paint layer 1. There is absolutely nothing special about these layers. The bottom one is just a layer that is painted full white, because remember that all layers are transparent. So if you want to paint against a white background, you'll need a layer fully painted white. And this is what this layer is. Just a common layer painted white and locked so you don't accidentally paint on it. Now I want to talk about a feature that's super important for painting and working with the program in general, and that is selections and the other tools related to selecting areas. Right here you can see a set of tools related to selection. Each one offers a slightly different way of working, but they all do the same thing: to select and isolate an area in the document. So here I'm going to grab the most basic of all the selection tools, the rectangular selection, and drag a square. You'll see this dotted line. This means that the area inside is selected. The very first function that a selection offers, which is great for painting, is that it limits where you can paint. If you grab any brush and try to draw on the canvas, you'll see that you can only draw inside where you made the selection. Now to deselect the area, just make sure you have any of the selection tools selected and just click anywhere on the canvas. I recommend you once again to grab all of these tools and play around to get a feeling for what they do. However, in my opinion, there are two selection tools that you'll be using most of the time in any illustration. The freehand selection tool allows you to do just that, create a selection just like if you were drawing. This tool is quite important for basic coloring. And then there is the Bezier curve selection tool, which allows you to create a selection just like if you were drawing a Bezier curve. Also really useful for coloring and painting sections. There is a tool that's related to the layers, but it becomes really useful when you use it in companion with the selections, and that is the transform tool. If you go to the transform tool or hit the default shortcut Ctrl and T, a dotted line with 8 control points will appear surrounding the painted area of the layer. Here you can use this tool to move the entire layer, the entire painted area, but if you use these control points, you can also scale in any of the directions, rotate or skew it. Really useful to make some quick adjustments. Now, as you notice, this can be really useful to make manipulations to the entire layer, but the really awesome thing is that you can use this in combination with the selection tool to affect only the selected portions of a layer. So here I'm going to use the rectangle tool to select the area where each of the shapes are. I'm using the transform tool on the selection rather than on the entire layer. Now it would be a good moment to talk about some more useful functionality of the layers that's related to the selections. The classic Ctrl-C to copy and Ctrl-V to paste work with layers. What you're doing is copying the entire layer and then pasting it as a new copy. You can see a new layer with the exact same name has been created here on top. Now you don't see any difference because they are stacked right on top of each other, but if you use the transform tool and move it out of the way, you'll see that you have a copy. When you make a selection, the copy and paste instead will be made of the selected area, though it still will be pasted as its own layer. One thing you should know about the selection tool is that the selection is done in the currently selected layer, not on the entire document. So if you create a new layer that's empty and then make a selection over the shapes, if you try to use the transform tool, it will fail because there is nothing on that layer. The same if you try to copy and paste. It will paste an empty area. There's one last feature that belongs to the layered windows, but it's more related to selecting areas of painting. This one is really important for digital painting in particular. You can lock the transparency of a layer with this icon over here. Now you can only paint in areas where there is pixel information. In other words, you can now only replace the color in the canvas, not add anything new. Now, you may be thinking, why this is so important? Well, there is a very common digital painting technique that relies on using this feature a lot, and we'll be seeing more about that in future tutorials. And we are done with the absolute basics of Krita. Of course, we just barely scratched the surface of the program, but the goal of this mini course wasn't to go over everything, but to get you up and running as fast as possible. I do plan to start making some tutorials on painting things and illustration in general using Krita, so if you want to learn more about digital painting and Krita, be on the lookout for future tutorials. And speaking of that, I want to remind you that I make illustration tutorials every week, so if you're interested, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, any comment is highly appreciated. And don't forget to check out my older illustration courses. They're mostly on Inkscape, but still you may be interested in some of them. That's it for today. See you in the next tutorial. Bye!